Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. In this video, I want to have a quick look at the chart of Tesla and see what it's potentially telling us. So let's dig into it right now. By the way, before I start, let me just say that I'm using a MacBook Pro for this particular video. I've never used MacBook for making my videos. I've always used Windows, PC, and things like that. So I'm very new to MacBook and Apple. So I hope you're patient with me because I'm actually struggling using Apple, Mac, and especially with this particular software that I'm using right now to make this video. So let's see how we do. So first of all, I think before we actually even start, it's worth just zooming out a little bit. And first of all, pay attention to that particular trend line that you see on my chart. You see this dashed line, this sloping dashed line here. And this is an important level because my good friend Charlie Burton, as a matter of fact, mentioned this in a video that we did together. If I just bring this, so this is the video from Charlie. I think this was back in about a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. So it's worth just looking at it one more time. In fact, if you see, this is the screenshot of that video. And I'll play for you a little clip of that video. But essentially what Charlie was saying was that we're looking for a move to meet this trend line.
So I do see this potential at least to test this trend line at some point in the coming weeks, and then we'll see if it can end up maybe even breaching that.
So let's go back to the chart. Here it is. And you will see that Tesla almost made it to that. By the way, I'm using a logarithmic chart. Let me actually turn this to a standard chart, a non-logarithmic. Yeah, so if you look at it on a standard non-logarithmic or linear chart, you will see that Tesla did actually come to test the level that Charlie was talking about, the trend line, that trend line resistance there. It made that level approximately, yeah, I think it was approximately just under 300 or 295, 290. So we did actually reach that trend line resistance. However, if you look at it on a non-logger, I beg your pardon, if you look at it on a standard chart, as a matter of fact, here it is. There it is. This is a logarithmic chart. Then it didn't quite meet that level. It just came short of that level, and it didn't even reach the level that I was hoping it would reach, which was the prior high of last year, which was just about 313. But in any case, I think we've come to a very important level of resistance, and it appears to me, given what Tesla has done, that we're actually quite due for a pullback or that retracement that we're expecting. In fact, if we just zoom in here a little bit. So, and by the way, before we continue, it's worth just mentioning that Tesla has tested the levels that I expected to test, the targets that I wanted to test in the last several weeks. In fact, this is a screenshot of my April video. And I mentioned back then that I was looking for these levels to test. In other words, for Tesla to come to these levels. And where are those levels? As you can see, here they are. 225. At the time when I made that video, Tesla was just around 165 or 160. And I was looking for these levels to be tested. Essentially, 225, 250, and 275, all of which have now been tested in the last several weeks. So what do we think is more likely now? I actually think that the odds have now increased for that pullback. Now you may think, well, the pullback is done. I actually don't think it is done. I think we've got more downside to go. I think just the beginning of a retracement or pullback. Why do I think that? Well, for one thing, we hit the resistance. If we just look at that non-logarithmic chart, this is the standard linear chart. Let me just show you again. There it is. So we hit a number of resistance levels. As I mentioned, the trend line resistance on this non-log chart. Then the 61.8% golden ratio retracement. Okay. Again, on a standard chart, on a linear chart, the 61.8% golden ratio retracement is at this level, 295, which is a level, by the way, Tesla tested, as we can see, and then it recoiled from. We can see that very clearly right there. Okay. So, yeah, I think this is the point in time where we're overdue for some kind of a pullback after this nice rally that we saw, a rally we expected, by the way, this nice rally. So we're overdue for a pullback here on the chart of Tesla. Now, where do we think this Tesla pullback could come down to? Let me just, by the way, I think the best thing to do at this point in time is just remove some of these lines. There's too many lines on my chart. And let me go back to that linear, I beg your pardon, logarithmic chart again. By the way, one important thing I want to mention here as well is if we look at the RSI and the MACD, you can see the divergences very clearly. I like to look at divergences, and you will see that as Tesla made a higher high here, there you go, you can see the higher high, it made a lower high on RSI, I think that's the 14 setting, and a lower high also, yeah, on the MACD. But actually, the MACD is what I'm looking for as a divergence majority of the time, not so much the RSI. But you can see higher high in the price with Tesla, but a lower high in the MACD, and of course the RSI as well. So in other words, negative divergence usually precedes some kind of a pullback or retracement. However, I always say that it's important for price to break support to confirm a negative divergence. So negative divergence on its own is not enough. You need further confirmation by some kind of break of support. So if we just zoom in on our chart now, let's zoom in. And we can see, just remove those two RSI and MACD here. Yeah, so we broke the near support. All right, so if we just get back my pen. All right, so we say that we broke that support right about there, okay? And I think the odds have now increased for a general pullback. By the way, notice this trend line resistance too on this logarithmic chart, this yellow trend line here on my chart. So we hit that right there and we recoil from it. Again, we hit that level with negative divergence on the MACD, okay? So I think the odds have increased for that multi-week pullback. Now, let me just say that even though I'm expecting a pullback or retracement in the near term, in other words, in the next few weeks, maybe even the next few months, I'm expecting still for higher prices by the end of this year. So longer term, you could say in the next 6 months, maybe even the next 12 months, I'm still remaining bullish on Tesla. I still think we could see much higher levels. In the short term, if by short term I mean the next few weeks, the next few months, I'm expecting, in other words, a pullback or retracement. So you could say short term, I'm a bit bearish, just for a pullback retracement, but longer term, the next 6 months, by the end of this year, I'm looking for higher prices, okay? So where do I think this pullback could drag Tesla down to? Well, here's what I'm waiting for. By the way, notice there's a gap right about here as well. We just zoom in here on the chart, and you can actually see it very clearly here. So there's our gap on the Tesla chart. And I think sometime in the next few weeks, we might see this gap fill. So, I mean, we might fill that gap a lot sooner, but just watch this level, this gap on the chart. And that's between 280 to 295. I think that's where it is, 280 to 95. Now, I don't know when this gap is going to get filled. It could be in the next few weeks, could be the next few months. But the bottom line is I'm expecting that gap to get filled at some point. The bottom line is that I think as long as price, here's the bottom line. I think as long as price stays below, let's say, this resistance here, let's say 290, all right, or this closing high here, 295. I'm looking for more downside, okay? Now, let me just say this. Even though I'm expecting a pullback, it is possible. I mean, there's always a risk that Tesla could come back and, it might, let me just push this back a little bit. Okay, let me just zoom out a little bit more again. All right. I mean, the question you might be asking is, well, couldn't Tesla just go back up and do another higher high? Yeah, it could. It's always possible. The risk is always there that Tesla could just go back and retest that high again. So I'm not denying that possibility. I just think it's a lower probability now. So even if Tesla, here's the bottom line, even if Tesla were to go back and retest the highs here, or this trend line resistance here, which is about 300, it doesn't really matter because we've got so many divergences, and I think we're overdue still for a much more of a deeper pullback here into some support levels. So my point is, even though I think we've already begun the pullback or retracement, I think the retracement, pullback, reversion to the mean, whatever you want to call it, I think it has already started. Okay, so I think we are now in the beginning stages of that pullback. Nevertheless, even if Tesla were to come and do a higher high, let's say at 300, I still think we're going to collapse once again, eventually down for a pullback into lower support levels. But my higher probabilities, I think, based on what's happening on the chart with the divergences that I mentioned on this chart, and with also hitting resistance as well, I think the odds are that we've already started that multi-week pullback. So basically, keeping it simple, if Tesla can now take out that support is 254, okay? So if Tesla can now take out that near support at 254, I think the odds increase. So what I'm waiting for is just a break of that support as a confirmation that we've already begun the pullback, okay? So all I'm waiting for is a confirmation that we've already started the pullback by breaking that near support, 254, okay? Once we can take out 254 to the downside, whether today or next few weeks or next few days, doesn't matter. But once we can take out that support at 254, then the odds increase for the retracement, pullback, reversion to the mean, whatever you want to call it, down to some important support levels. Now, which support levels do I think is more likely? Now, before we go on, look at the moving averages. My good friend Charlie, one thing he likes is a retest of previous resistance. Okay, so Charlie says, and I'm sure you know this as well from your own knowledge of technical analysis, that whenever price takes out a prior high, like this was the prior high, when Tesla was here, this was the resistance level here. It's about 220, 215, 214. Okay, you can actually draw a line across that level if you want. Okay, not so easy with this pen here, but you can see. So we broke that level. So when we broke this resistance, Charlie, he likes to say that price often comes back and retests the place where it took out, the breakout point. So that's what I think is quite likely. I think in the next few weeks we could come back and retest. Watch this level very carefully. The breakout point. It's about 215 approximately there. So that puts it about here, which is also convenient because of the 50% logarithmic retracement. Okay, the 50% blue line here meets us about the exact same point, the prior high of February, the February high, which is about 215, 214, 215. That's a level that could get tested. I think, again, I think if Charlie was here, he would say very likely we could come back and test that level in the next several weeks and months. This might take some time, by the way. Now, as to more near levels, the near levels which I think are more likely to get tested, the levels I'm watching with great interest is number one, we got a lot of symmetrical projections here. These magenta lines, these purple dashed lines. Essentially, what I've done is I've measured these moves that you're seeing here, and I projected them. I projected these from the highs here, and that would give us essentially these levels. So I measured these two declines. I projected them from these highs, and this gave us the symmetrical projections, which comes in about 245, 243. So my higher probability is that 245, 243 are going to get tested. And that, by the way, is about the same level with this 50 SMA. You see this grayish line, this white grayish line? That's the 50 simple moving average. That grayish white line is now moving up, and it's going to be soon at about the same level as these magenta lines, these symmetrical projections, which basically is about the same level as the June low. So that's 245, 243 approximately, so we've got several support levels coming in at that level. Several support. Why? June lows and the 50 SMA, all meeting us at about this level. There it is. It's about 245, 243. That's a level which I think very likely is going to get tested in the next, potentially the next few days or weeks. Okay. Should we break down below 254, which I think eventually is going to anyway. Okay, so that's the first level of support that I think is going to get tested, about 245, 243, but I think we could go a bit lower. So there is a potential that we may even test this 38.2% Fibonacci retracement. That puts it about 231. So if I was to put a region, I mean, we've mentioned a number of levels here. We've mentioned this 50 SMA and symmetrical projections here, puts it about 245, 243. We mentioned the 38.2% retracement here, 231. And we mentioned the prior high of February, which puts it about 214, 215. Okay, so if I was to put a region, which I think is going to get tested, a zone, I would say between 245 to 214. That's a region which I think Tesla could pull back down to, which by the way is quite convenient as well, because this rising trend line, I don't know if you can see this trend line here. Let me remove all this so you can actually see this. If we zoom out a little bit on this chart, Tesla chart. Now, if you look very closely, let me get back my pen here. So if you look very closely, you'll see this rising trend line. Okay, by connecting this low here, that trend line meets us at about the same region. Yeah, it comes into this region, as you can see there, into this box region that I just pointed out, 245, where the 50 SMA meets us there, and 215. So that's a nice level that I'm looking to get tested, which would, I mean, if we see a deep pullback, then it's quite probable that Tesla may pull back down to the lower part of this trend line support. So it is probable, I think it's probable that should we see a pullback or retracement in Tesla, which I think is likely, I think that's the more likely scenario, assuming we've already topped here. Okay, so I'm assuming that I actually think it's quite probable that Tesla is on a collision course with I like to use this physics terms, collision course, and astrophysics, cosmology terms. So I think we're likely to be in a collision course with this trend line support and this box region here for Tesla. Okay, that's what I think. So that puts it in a region. The upper support is about 245, 243. The next support is going to be about this 100 EMA or this 38.2% retracement here. That puts it about 230, 231. The lower support puts it at the February high. That puts it about 214. Okay, so those are the levels I'm looking at. Between, as I mentioned, just to repeat my point, that's the level I'm looking at. The region or zone of support that I'm looking for a pullback. I'm sorry to repeat this point again. 245, 230, and eventually, perhaps, and I think probably, Charlie's favorite support level, prior highs, 214. Okay, so that's the zone I'm looking for a pullback. By the way, could it go lower than that? It's possible. I mean, we shall see if it's going to go lower than that or not, but that's the minimum level that I'm looking for, between 245 to 214. And by the way, I think once we test those levels, and I do think a pullback is very likely because of what we're seeing on the stock market. If you just look at the chart of the stock market here for a second, let's go on the S&P chart. You can see the S&P is way overdue for a pullback as well. So for that reason, that's why I think that Tesla, depending on how deep the stock market pullback is going to be, I think we could see a pullback retracement on Tesla as well. But here's the thing. I'm going to remain bullish no matter how deep this pullback is going to be, okay? Because we cannot predict with certainty, okay? All we can have is a probability. So no matter how deep this pullback is going to be, I need Tesla to stay above this support region, this support. Let me just point this out. Let me get my pen again. I need Tesla to stay above 190, or let's say about 197 or 190. 197 is the 61.8% golden ratio retracement based on the logarithmic retracement, this rally. So I think as long as Tesla stays above support is 197 to 190, I'm going to remain bullish. Okay, so keeping it simple, as long as any pullbacks in the next few weeks on Tesla remain above 197 to 190, okay, then I'm remaining, and I'm going to keep a long-term bullish positive perspective for higher prices on Tesla by the end of this year. Okay, so short term, I'm still looking for a pullback down to the support region here that I mentioned. Okay, all I'm saying is that the pullback retracement has to stay above 190 support in order for me to maintain that longer term bullish perspective, because any break of 190, a sustained break of 190, would make me quite bearish. So I would not want to see that. I don't want to see that, and I don't think it's likely anyway, so I'm not expecting that. But all I'm saying is, provided and as long as Tesla remains above 190, 197, I'm going to maintain that bullish long-term perspective for higher prices on Tesla. Okay, keeping it simple as that. Okay, so I finally managed to make my first video on this MacBook here on Apple. No, I've never been a fan of MacBook or Apple, but I'm going to try and use it from now on. All right, guys, I hope this video has helped. Let me know your comments. Again, let me know what you think in the comments section. Have a fantastic week. Bye for now.